We're going to go ahead and get started with today's committee meeting on affordability, accountability, and planning. I welcome everyone being here today as spring in Central Texas has definitely popped, and the weather's nice, and we appreciate everyone making the time to be here with us today. Please be advised that this meeting is being broadcast over the internet, so just be aware of that because you never know what happens on the internet. Agenda item number 2 is consideration of approval of the minutes from the December 10th, 2014 committee meeting. Are there any, I need a motion for approval. Any questions or discussion?
No.
All in favor say aye.
Aye.
Passes. Agenda item number 3 is consideration of approval of the consent agenda. Agenda item 5A, the facilities protocol, and agenda item 5H1, the rule on the Good Neighbor Scholarship Program, are on the consent agenda. Are there any agenda items that anyone wants to remove or move to the consent agenda? Okay. And then I will ask for a motion to approve the consent agenda.
Second.
Any discussion? All in favor say aye.
Aye.
Thank you. Agenda item 4 is public testimony on items relating to the Committee on Affordability, Accountability, and Planning. We do not have any testimony at this time, so we'll move forward. Agenda item 5F, we're going to go ahead and take out of order right now, and it is an update on the Texas Higher Education Strategic Planning Committee activities, and we're very fortunate today to have Dr. Larry Faulkner, President Emeritus of the University of Texas at Austin, to provide an update for us. Dr. Faulkner, thank you very much for being here today, and thank you obviously for your service on the committee and for providing us an update.
Thank you, Chairman Jenkins, and thank you, committee members, for inviting our presentation this morning. I'm speaking, of course, on behalf of the Higher Education Strategic Planning Committee, which has been working at the board's direction for about a year. Closing the Gaps is coming to a close this year. Closing the Gaps has been an extremely successful higher education plan for the state of Texas for the last 15 years. Created in 2000, it covers the needs of the state, or has addressed the needs of the state, I should say. From 2000 to 2015. Our purpose in the Higher Education Strategic Planning Committee is to develop a new plan, at least to recommend one to the board, and we've been working on that. Texas needs a new plan in place by the middle of this year. The Coordinating Board's Higher Education Strategic Planning Committee began work last spring with the goal of recommending a new plan to the board by the coming summer. We are on track. Woody Hunt has provided outstanding leadership in the chair. The members have been diligent and focused, and the staff of the Texas Higher Education Coordinating Board have worked creatively, expertly, and hard in support of the project. The Planning Committee has met essentially monthly since March a year ago. In these meetings, we have received expert testimony from a great range of authorities in Texas, from elsewhere in the nation, and even elsewhere in the world. We will continue to meet monthly into July when we expect to complete our report. We intend to submit it formally at the Coordinating Board scheduled meeting on July 23rd. The plan currently in development is firmly founded on the imperative to establish a globally competitive workforce in Texas by 2030. While Texas has many public concerns, few of them can be well addressed without a workforce with the needed insight, skills, and knowledge. Moreover, few public concerns will see real progress without resources that must come from a strong economy, which in turn must depend on an educated workforce able to adapt and compete at the top level. The world's best workforces are becoming very much better educated than the standard to which we have become accustomed. Educational achievement in 2-year and 4-year post-high school programs is a primary concern. All forms of post-high school certification are important. Completing degree and certificate programs is critical. The committee's report is built on 4 major goals. One dealing with educational attainment, which is the fraction of the Texas population actually holding a degree or certificate. One dealing with degree and certificate completion in Texas colleges and universities. One dealing with marketable skills. And one dealing with control of student debt. Let me go through those goals briefly as we now formulate them in the draft report. The first goal covers educational attainment, and the simple statement is by 2030, at least 60% of Texans ages 25 to 34 will have a post-secondary credential or degree. This is a big percentage to shoot for. Right now, only about 38% of Texans aged 25 to 34 have any kind of post-high school degree or certificate. But the best educated societies in the world, among them our Canadian neighbors, already have reached 60% or very close to it among their 25 to 34-year-olds. We need to move the level of attainment dramatically up among younger Texans. It will take work, but the report points the way to realistic interim targets and strategies that would get us to the final goal if we can stay on course. Critical to it all is to focus on and to succeed in improving the educational level of young Texans, young Hispanic Texans, who will make up a majority of the students in school between now and 2030. The second goal is about completion, and here's the statement of goal. By 2030, at least 550,000 students in that year will complete a certificate, associate, bachelor's, or master's from a Texas public, independent, or for-profit college or university. Data from the Bureau of Labor Statistics make clear that students don't get much of an economic lift from college attendance unless they complete a degree or certificate. We can do better at that than what we are doing now. Completion is also central to success in achieving the workforce Texas needs in 2030. Under closing the gaps, Texas has been able to generate an impressive growth in degree production. We need to continue that record. Our report is targeting 376,000 degrees and certificates in 2020, 455,000 in 2025, and on the way to 550,000 in 2030. We're in the ballpark of doubling production between now and 2030 is what the goal is. For reasons already mentioned, we need to keep a close eye on success among Hispanic Texans. The target for them is to earn 138,000 degrees and certificates in 2020, 198,000 in 2025, and 285,000 in 2030. That's rapid growth, and it needs to be rapid growth. The report carries other targets too, but in the interest of time, I will not cover them now. The third goal relates to marketable skills, and here's the statement. By 2030, all graduates from Texas public institutions of higher education will have completed programs with identified marketable skills. The report will call for every undergraduate institution in Texas to think more explicitly about how it can prepare its graduates to succeed in the world of work after graduation. All programs develop skills of value in the employment marketplace. The new plan will require every institution to identify those skills formally for each of its programs. Students need to be aware of the marketable skills affiliated with their programs. The plan would ensure that institutions document, update, and communicate to students the skills acquired in their programs so that students can communicate those skills to potential employers. Moreover, I think more explicit attention to marketable skills will give teaching staff responsible for programs everywhere in the state a more ready basis for thinking carefully about how they're developing those skills among students. The fourth goal relates to student debt. And here's the statement. By 2030, undergraduate student loan debt will not exceed 60% of first-year wage for graduates of Texas public institutions. The members of the Higher Education Strategic Planning Committee, like practically everyone else in Texas, have concerns about how higher education can better control costs, how it is financed, and the financial barriers that students and families encounter with respect to post-high school education. We think the best way to focus public imagination on the financial issues is to set a goal of not allowing the debt load on students to rise further, as measured against their earning power at graduation. Right now, students who have debt at graduation are carrying, on the average, a load equal to 60% of their first-year wage. In the proposed plan, the goal is for Texas not to allow that number to rise over the next 15 years. Success would require collaborations among elected officials and leaders in higher education, and it will probably require imaginative reinvention of paths for students and methods for teaching and learning. Let me close by reinforcing something mentioned earlier, which is that the proposed plan rests on careful assessments of the possible. The committee is willing to set challenging targets, but we are doing our best to set achievable targets commensurate with the genuine needs of Texas in 2030. It is a privilege for us to serve Texas and to report today, and I thank you for listening.
Thank you, Dr. Faulkner. Questions?
Yes,
No?
I have one. We don't have this written down anywhere. Did we get a handout on this? So I just want to know. I have closing the gaps, but I don't have the goals, the 4 goals listed. Oh, I'd like to have a copy of that if we could.
Okay.
I can provide a copy of this text
It was
if
sent.
you'd like.
It was sent to you earlier, but we can get you a copy.
Okay. So the 60% of first-year salary debt load, is that an average? Because obviously some students will make a whole lot more the first year than others. So you would say that's a state average goal?
That's the average goal among students who are carrying debt.
Okay.
It's not averaged over all students.
Excellent. Okay. Thank you very much.
Let me add one thing. One of the targets, at least at present, addresses the percent of students with debt. So the purpose of it is so that we don't expand the number of students with debt. So we keep it at least no higher than where it is now, the percentage of students.
Harold?
Dr. Faulkner, thank you very much for your service. I know that there's been a great deal of time and effort that has gone into this, and having read the report, I think they're certainly attainable goals, but it's going to take a great deal of effort by everyone, the institutions, the legislature, and it certainly will be a challenge. One question that I had on Goal 1, the 60% attainment, does that include in-migration?
Yes.
Not necessarily just Texas educated, it will be those moving into the state with a credential?
Yes. Texas has historically imported educated talent in pretty good numbers, and it's fine for us to do that, I think, and we benefit from it. But as we look at our overall attainment and performance, you should think about the first two goals as kind of working in tandem. The first goal is really about how high a level of education we need to get to in the state, however we get it, whether we educate our own students or import people who are educated. The second goal is really about degree production and certificate production by Texas institutions, by and large of Texas students, overwhelmingly of Texas students. So the first goal is about getting the whole enterprise to a high level of attainment, including import. The second is about educational effectiveness in Texas institutions.
The Canadians are at 60% now.
They are. Again, I want to be sure everyone understands this is about degrees and certificates of all kinds.
All kinds.
So these are 2-year degrees, 4-year degrees, all kinds. The Canadians make very extensive use of 2-year, largely vocational programs.
Do you know what the breakdown is between a bachelor's or master's and the certificates and associates?
Among the Canadians?
Yes.
Yeah, the Canadians have a bachelor's degree fraction that's very similar to ours, which is in the theirs is probably in the low 30% range, 33 or something like that, and the rest would be mostly 2-year degrees.
So a great deal of the burden of meeting this goal is going to come from the career and technical schools and the community colleges.
Well, that's certainly possible. I think that's a fertile area for us to work, and it would be, I think, very beneficial to the quality of our workforce if we brought a larger fractions of students through 2-year post-high school experiences.
Thank you. On goal number 2, the 550,000 students completing certificate, associates, bachelor's, master's. The program spells out, and you've dealt with this in the past. I mean, these are goals, and they're certainly not necessarily the providing a solution for them. This is just the goals. But you've dealt with trying to get the Hispanic population more involved in post-secondary education. That's a pretty big jump in numbers, even above the closing the gaps. What do you see that would encourage more of the Hispanic population to become involved in post-secondary education?
Well, I think we've already
How do we get there?
How do we get there? I think that if we can continue the growth we've already experienced, actually, we have a good chance of reaching those goals, even though those are big number goals. The data that the coordinating board staff have shown us about what kinds of growth rates have been achieved, not just among the population at large, but among the subpopulations. It looks realistic for us to get to this 550,000 goal. The certainly success among the Hispanic fraction of the population is absolutely critical. But it's also true that during the Closing the Gaps era, we have achieved much better participation among the Hispanic population. Not at the level of participation we need to go toward, but we have made a lot of progress, and I think we would be relying on that progress continuing. I do believe personally, and I think that's a view shared among a lot of people on the committee, that we are going to have to pay greater attention to the high school to college transition in Texas if we really want to hit these numbers. That is an area that bridges the responsibilities of the Higher Education Coordinating Board and the TEA. So we have the risk that it doesn't get the attention it needs because it's in nobody's bailiwick. We're going to have to rise above that somehow, I think, in the next period.
And would you say the dual credit or the early college high school is significant in making certain that happens in the future?
I believe that the Strategic Planning Committee has a high interest in those kinds of programs.
Okay.
And also, I think those kinds of programs potentially have the ability to help us control costs. That's one of the things I was referring to when I said that in that last part about debt, that's actually a placeholder for better managing the financial issues that surround higher education. And I made the comment that we need some invention. And some of that might relate to paths of student progress. Early college, for example, might be a pretty useful thing for us to address that with.
Thank you.
Have you thought about as far as branding? I think it's important that this message be taken out to the state. And I know it was closing the gaps before. Have we thought about what we're going to call this, and what is the plan for really driving this message out to the public so that everybody adopts this? This is what we're going to do. Have y'all had a chance to think of that part yet?
Well, Mr. Chairman, I agree with you completely that branding is an important thing, that actually closing the gaps was a success in branding, and we need something similar. The committee hasn't talked about it in great measure yet, but I think that Woody and the leadership of this committee, I think, is sensitive to that question. I'm a chemist. I can't do that.
We've talked about this extensively internally, and one thing we're working with now, it's a little bit of a compromise. We need to get away from the compromise, but it's at least one individual of significance likes Texas leads. Staff likes 60 by 30 Texas, which indicates clearly the overall goal, 60% by 2030. And we think even if you combine the two, it would be known at some point by 60 by 30 Tex. And we think that's something that once people connect it to the goal is easily memorable and clarifies the goal. So that's what we're working with. We had a very busy meeting last, and the intent was to share that with the committee, but we never got there. I want to say this is really an amazing committee. I've had a chance to work with a lot of good committees, and frankly, one of the big parts of compensation for staff members here is the opportunity to work with committees like this, because we get to learn a lot from the committee, and it's really more than salary. Is one of the things we gain a lot from working here.
No, all I would say, David, is be bold and be memorable. I think it's an opportunity that we don't want to pass up.
This committee will not accept anything less than that. I think that they have high standards.
Well, I do believe the committee will have a high interest in this topic, but it isn't one we've talked about yet.
Gary, you had a question.
Excuse me. So the first two goals are fairly geared towards getting these standards, these marks of degrees of attainment that people are getting. Is the third goal going to be more geared towards the quality of those degrees? Because if we just churn out a bunch of degrees but they don't actually mean anything, or they don't actually give real skills to the students, then that's not going to help them. So the third goal, I think you stated, was something along the lines of having marketable skills that students will know that they have. Is that where quality of the degrees is going to come in as well?
Well, I think that the committee believes that all the degree programs in Texas actually do produce marketable skills, but people don't address the issue explicitly. What we're urging, because there's such a strong theme about workforce development in this report, there is the message really in that third goal to push institutions, the people responsible for individual programs inside those institutions and the students themselves to think more explicitly about what are they carrying away from this educational experience, what is actually going to be functionally valuable to them as they go try to succeed in the workplace after graduation. How can we make the development of those skills, whatever they are, in this program or that, how can we make those more effectively developed in students? I think everybody who's dealing with an educational program ought to be spending time thinking about how to develop those things better in students, and maybe even how to include one or two things that we're not dealing with right now in this program or that. So that's what that's about. It's really a challenge to drive people to think more explicitly. And of course, the way it has to take, the form it has to take for an oversight agency like the coordinating board is that you have to go push programs to give you a list of their skills and think about how they're developing them, and you have to make them be more explicit to us. What you hope is that rubs off into actual improvement of the programs and the relationship between the programs and the students.
Any other questions?
I just had
Yes, sir.
one. The last legislative session, Doctor, we saw the community college enter into performance-based, outcomes-based funding, and that was one of our recommendations to the legislature this year. How do you feel about that as far as performance-based? And I mean, if we're going to accomplish this, the universities obviously are going to have to be a major part in that attainment level. How do you see that helping us reach those goals?
Well, you're asking a question here that's about essentially about a stance to be taken on particular legislation. The committee hasn't addressed this at all, so I think the committee would agree that funding policies bear on the attainment of goals. So I don't think, as speaking as a voice for the committee, that I can say anything. I mean, I personally believe performance, building performance into the financial mechanisms is a highly desirable feature.
Let me add one thing. An important part of our discussion about the last goal was there's several pieces that go together in terms of the debt. You know, there's tuition fees, there's state funding, there's there's this whole conglomerate of things. And one thing that came out of that discussion you'll see is currently one of the proposed strategies is that following development of the plan that we get together a group and try to see if there's some way to think of a funding model that really no one has at this point that really right now you've got formula funding, you have capital budgeting sometimes not over here. You've got other sources for student aid, and there's some way to make this more of a whole? We don't know that there is, but we think if we do this that it may inform and help our formula funding. If that's what we remain with, even better. And we actually talked with the foundation yesterday about several other things in this plan, and one thing we're hoping, if that remains in there, is that we can get together a group that's not just Texas, but several other key states to talk about this and use the best creativity of everyone thinking to preserve and improve the quality of higher education we have in the country. And and Dr. Faulkner brought up this suggestion. Hope you remember that.
I don't remember it, but...
Well, if you don't want to take credit for it, let me know, because I've remembered that. I think it was an important point of the discussion.
I thought you did, David.
Okay, well, I guess I'll take credit then. But
wonder it's such a good idea, huh?
Well, I think we need a guide star of some kind on the financial side. What happens in generations of experience in Texas? can be described by what I'm about to say. But what we've done is, for over decades and decades, is that the legislature has basically tried to put into higher education what it could reasonably or conveniently afford, I would say, without really any policy statement, taking advantage of the fact that higher education is about the only part of state government that can generate its own revenues. So there has been a kind of, you can say partnership between higher education and legislature, where both sides just sort of pushed along however they could. But there hasn't been any coherent concept of what's the right place for us to be in the mix between tuition-based funding and appropriated funding, for example. Where the rubber meets the road there is in student debt. In the end, it's really it becomes a question of what's the right level of affordability. And student debt, if we were to seize on that as the right guide star, would give us a place for legislators in higher education to talk about that trade-off and to try to come to something that's a better reasoned basis for how we're choosing to finance higher education. And it's a place that will put some pressure on the cost side, which is needed. So that's what I'm hoping that goal actually becomes, is a way of focusing the financial discussions much more productively in years ahead.
Members? Dr. Faulkner, thank you for, first of all, being here today, and of course for your service on the committee. We will definitely look forward to July for the full report, where I know that the entire board is very focused and excited to hear what comes from the committee. And as David said, we know that committee is some of the best thinkers in the state. And as you said, we know what will come out of that will be something that we will all be proud of and something that we'll all work toward achieving. So thank you once again. Appreciate you being here.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
All right. Agenda item 5A was also on the consent calendar. And so we'll move to agenda item 5B, is consideration of adopting the Commissioner's recommendation to the committee relating to approval of the financial condition report. Susan Brown will provide a little update and then be available for any questions.
Certainly, and this is, I wanted to let you know, this is the third year that we have done the financial condition report. It is a legislative rider that we do it. I think we're getting better at it as we go forward. We had actually no comments from the community colleges. I think they're more familiar with what the measures are. We're doing well. The long-term debt obligation for community colleges actually did increase by $1.8 billion. We think that was because during this past year, and over the last couple of years, we've had a kind of a downturn in the building, and so they've taken advantage of that, issued bonds to expand their campuses and that sort of thing. And so we think that's part of that, is what that represents. For the most part, we have institutions are in good shape. We do have 9 that still do not reach the minimum assessed property valuation of the $2.5 billion. Just to tie things together, that was one of our recommendations for the community college baccalaureate programs, is that they would need to reach that $2.5 billion valuation before offering baccalaureate programs. And that is in, John will probably cover it, there's 2 bills, SB 271 and HB something that put that forward as part of the bills, and I don't remember what the HB one was. So out of our 50 community college districts, we have 45 that have no indication of stress at all, which is a good thing. We have 5 that have different thresholds. They're still in good shape. It's not that they're really in trouble, but we do have the financial condition report should be at your place.
Yeah.
Okay. So we have 6 that don't meet the threshold of the 3 indicators. Alamo had some things. Their operating margins took a negative turn. Cisco didn't meet 3 of them. So, but what we do is we take, because there's different reasons for the different measures, and we pull those together for an index. And that index is probably the best, looking at kind of overall. And so that's where we get the index. It's an index that has been used. UT System uses it. There's a bunch of different places that use it. So other than that, I will go ahead and answer any questions if y'all have anything.
Jacob?
Could you describe the problems that Cisco College is facing?
Yes, let me get back to the index. I can look at them. Their net position on the back, and I'm looking at Appendix B, where I looked at this. Their operating margin is they're just breaking even. Their reserve has gone down, I believe. Their equity ratio went down, and their, I believe, are the ones that went down. Look at. Their bond and bond debt is excluded, so their return net position on their net asset went down. Operating margin is at a 0. You're on the borderline there. It's a slightly negative, less than 1%, and then they went down the primary reserves. So those are the ones where they kind of had some issues. But they're a very small campus, and so it's really hard for those small campuses to keep going.
Austin College is not that small.
Austin College is not. They have their bond, and it's still probably based from when they bought Highland Mall and doing all the construction in Highland Mall and doing all that conversion that hit into their reserves. So it was something they planned for, but it still looks on their budget sheet, on their balance sheet, it shows up, and that's why it's.
I think I remember the last report that we did. Do we do this yearly or
We do it annually? Yes.
Annually. That's one. So some of the same ones are
Some
still
of the
at the
same
bottom
ones,
of the
yes.
barrel. When we see a trend line, do we go and talk to the regents, or do we just issue the report?
We issue the report, we send it out, we get comments back from them. Because of what they talked about being from last year, of course, living in Austin, we know more about them because they're right here. But we know that that's part of that Highland Mall purchase and the reconstruction and everything for Highland Mall.
Do we send out any press releases on this report?
We don't. We send it over to the after it's approved by the board, we'll send it to the legislature, the higher ed committees, so House Higher Ed, Senate Higher Ed, and the governor's office.
Well, I think there are a lot of communities across the state that really don't recognize the situation their community colleges are in. Mm-hmm. And probably
we can send it out to them.
Probably some of the personal regents that I know that sit on community colleges boards are not aware of where they really rank in the state. Mm-hmm. And obviously there are some schools that are hoarding money. But that's not to say that's bad, because they may be planning a big, expenditure in the next year or something like that. But those that have really good scores should be commended, and their communities should be proud of them. And then those that really are struggling, I promise you, their communities are probably not aware, because nobody puts this on the front page.
Right. And we can send this out to all the trustees. We have a.
We should do that. Let me add, it occurs to me, and we can talk about this, but we probably ought to add this to our training program for regents and trustees in the fall. And so, Mary, let's make sure this is part of the program so we can explicitly address this at that time.
I just think every year those leaders need to be reminded, because you think, oh, it was a one-time thing, but the same ones that always end up at the bottom are still struggling, and really the people respond to data when they know that it was done by a third party. It wasn't just the president of the college spoon feeding it to the trustees. So.
Yeah. And I will say, on the note of something good, Texarkana College had some issues for a while. They were in the paper. They had a complete management change there, and they are actually off the list and doing very well now. And so that's something that should be commended.
And maybe you said this, Susan, but when we provide this, you don't get any contradictory feedback. I mean, the numbers are the numbers.
There are times, in the last couple of times, we've had some comments from the institutions kind of explaining it. This time, we checked with them twice, even the ones where we were writing it up. We said, what kind of comments, and then they didn't provide any.
But they
have that opportunity.
They agree to the accuracy,
yes,
and that it is what it is.
The numbers that we use in here come from what we call the CARET system, which is a reporting system, and then we check it against their audited financial report, their annual audited financial report, to make sure all of our numbers are adding up with what they've provided.
You might want to briefly explain what the CARET system is.
The CARET system, sorry.
Sounds like a good thing. But.
The CARET system is, it is. Yes. It's a carrot with a little bit of a stick on the end. It actually is a system that they input their financial information into so that we can more readily look at it and pull it all together, that sort of thing, instead of having to enter it off of each institution's financial audits. That way we're not transposing numbers and that sort of thing. So
but they know you can validate the numbers to make sure they're not.
And we do validate the numbers against their audited financial, because they have to report that, provide us with that document also.
Well, I don't want to call out any school, but I just noticed recently some press about Kilgore, but Kilgore shows up here with 0 stress factors, and
this is for fiscal year 14.
Right, but still, it's a good report for them that I'm sure the community is probably not aware of unless, someone really is, publishing this report.
Right.
So I just want to say thank you. I think it's an excellent barometer for what these schools need to be looking at. Other schools, they're similar size, they're similar community, and they can maybe reach out to see who's doing better jobs than them or congratulate each other. There's a lot to be said about competition. And when you publicly put all the facts on the table, I know this took a lot of work. So
it does, and Roland Gilmore is in the audience, and he does all the work.
I agree. I mean, I think the value is the ranking of these,
putting it all in there.
The compilation, not just that I know what mine is, but that I know where I stand collectively. I think that's the real value. And the learning of best practices is what helps everybody hopefully continue to improve and get better.
And there will be it will probably be a little bit thicker next year. There's a change in the way the retirement is, the obligation for the retirement is going to be handled by TRS for fiscal year 15. So there's going to be some changes in the reporting. So everybody's going to kind of show a drop because of that, and it's a change. It's not, they haven't done anything. It's a change in how they're going to have to report all that information, and it's being done through we're working with TRS to get the word out to them and make sure that everybody's prepared for it.
Susan, if you're saying, well, this is 2014, let me just say, for reports that are as comprehensive as this, to get something that current is pretty amazing.
Well,
normally you'll get a government report and it's 3 years old.
Yes.
In healthcare, we're thankful to get something that's 2 years old, so that's pretty amazing.
Some of the things with Kilgore will show up for 15.
I'm sure, but
so.
Susan, this tool should help the institutions. Right. It should help them identify where their stress points are so that they can more adequately address those.
And when we first put it in place, there was some controversy about it, and then I think now they are starting to use it. They have access, once they put it everything into the Carrot system, it will put out this report for them, for their institution, and they can look at it themselves before we even compile it all into a single report.
So if there are weaknesses, that
They
it helps
should
them
already
identify.
know.
Okay.
They should already know.
Okay.
Any other questions? Thank you, Susan. Agenda item 5C is a report.
We need to vote.
Oh, do we need to?
That's a
I'm sorry.
consideration.
Thank you. Any other questions or discussion? All in favor, say aye. Opposed? Right. Now, thank you, Susan.
Okay.
Now we'll move on to agenda item 5C, which is a report on facilities projects that were submitted to the coordinating board. And Susan will answer any questions and be available.
Okay, we don't have very many projects. I think a lot of them are waiting to see what happens with TRBs. So that's not a big surprise. You will see that there is one that was for approval. And this goes back to one of our, again, John will cover this. This is one of the legislative requests that we put, or recommendations that we put forward. When they did the pulling all the facilities approval away from the coordinating board and had us start reviewing projects, they forgot one part of the statute, which says that we still approve the energy savings contracts. And so you will see that we did approve one for Stephen F. Austin. And so that's why you see that one little approval in there. We have a bill Representative Clardy has introduced, and I think it was on local and consent in the House, HB 599, that will actually move that over to SECO. They do it for all the other state agencies. It just makes sense for them to be doing it because they have the expertise over there.
What is SECO?
State Energy Conservation Office, I think. So that's why you see that one where it's an approval.
Right.
We still don't have information on deferred maintenance.
No, but there's an interesting bill that has $500 million tied to deferred maintenance, and it references the FY 2012 report that the institutions provided to the coordinating board. Back in 2012, we actually had a couple of institutions that reported zero deferred maintenance, and we questioned them at that time, and they certified, oh no, this is correct. So now the bill comes forward with $500 million to be distributed based on that report. So
Oops.
we're getting a lot of questions from some institutions about, well, can't we update that number? And we're like, no, I'm really sorry. So I have a feeling that if that bill passes, that we will be requested to get updated numbers from all the institutions.
Okay.
Just a guess.
Any other questions on this topic? All right. Agenda item 5D is an update on the Texas Consumer Resource for Education and Workforce Statistics, Texas Cruise. Susan will provide a brief video and provide a demonstration of the capabilities of the tool.
Yes, and we're going to see a video first, and then if you would like, I can show you a little bit about how that actually works. Go ahead.
You're getting your kids or loved ones ready for college. If Texas is where they want to stay for higher education, there's an interactive website they have to check out, Texas Cruise. One feature, it guides students through loan debt and for 2- and 4-year colleges and universities. Commissioner of Higher Education Raymond Paredes and Andres Alcantar, the Chairman Commissioner for the Texas Workforce Commissioner, joining me this morning. Thank you both for being with us. So Cruise, it is something that people can go to, a website that truly helps them get an idea of what they're going to be planning for either two.
Absolutely. We're proud to partner on this very important tool. It's important that we provide relevant, vibrant information to our students, and we think this is a great tool to help them get more informed about their choices.
And when we say interactive, how interactive is it? I know it breaks down, it can help them budget, it could help them plan. It can actually help them figure out the tuition based on 2- or 4-year college or university.
It provides virtually all the information you need about making choices about college and career You can look up individual institutions and look at their profile, their graduation rates, how much it costs to attend, what kinds of majors they have. You can look up particular majors
Apparently
and
it's all the
see
way
what
up.
people in those fields earn 1, 2, 5, 10 years down the road. So it's a very good device for helping students and their families make choices about where to go to school,
Sure.
what to study, and what you will make once you finish.
And you look back and I wish this was available when I was around here, because sometimes the college or university you wanted to go to, they would calculate for you, but it was a little off sometimes. And this seems like this gives people a good perspective and gives them comparison as to maybe they want to stay closer to home, or they could go further from home and be paying the same prices.
Oh, absolutely. It gives them a great understanding of the value of the different colleges, the different programs that are offered. It provides reassurance that the choices that they are making will lead to great opportunities. And with the economy that we have in Texas and the jobs that are being created, this sort of information really helps them decide between the wonderful opportunities that are out there being created.
And that picture we were just watching, that graphic, it just gives you an idea of the comparisons from universities and institutions that people can actually compare to, and that's just very visual. And that's just part of this website. That's what you like about this website. You want people to get on there and be a part of it, participate in this.
We want students and their families to take advantage of the fact that Texas has probably the best data collection system in the country. We have a very rich base of data regarding workforce, regarding higher education. We want students and their families to take advantage of it and make wise decisions about what's best for them educationally.
And we say students, but also we were chatting before this interview and we said this is also a great tool for adults who maybe want to consider furthering higher education, because it really breaks down so much. This database is just incredible.
It really is, and we do have a lot of adults transitioning from different occupations. This really provides a sense of assurance in terms of their choices. A great tool to help them navigate the different choices that are out there for them. It certainly aligns with what is happening in different communities around the state, and provides them the basis to feel comfortable about their choices.
And that website is at txcruise.org. So if you're watching right now, make sure you go on there. Start now. Start with your kids. Show them the process and give them the idea of where they can and what they should do in regards to planning ahead. And that's what you want this website to be featured as, is the planning ahead tool.
Absolutely. And it gives you information about how much money you earn upon achieving the baccalaureate degree, achieving a master's degree, achieving a doctoral degree. So it gives you information about how much education you need in a particular field to get ahead.
The times have changed, haven't they? Because this tool was never available, I would say, maybe 5 years ago.
Well, I remember the choices that I had, and this information would have been very grateful.
Yeah.
And certainly will also help our counselors in terms of working with our students. And it's a great tool. The information is powerful. It should really go a long way into helping students make good choices.
And what happens if parents want their children to be a part of this? Do they ask their children to ask their counselors about this, or can the parents do it with them? Is that simple and that interactive?
It's wide open. It's wide open for everyone. We encourage teachers, students, parents, counselors to look at it, to understand the great choices that are available in our community colleges, our technical schools, and universities, because they are diverse and they are expanded.
And you would have to say that this is something that people could, it's easily accessible for anybody
It's very
that's
easily
not
accessible.
that tech friendly.
I am not that computer literate, and I used it very easily last night.
All right, there you have it, folks. Thanks so much for being with us. There's the information on your screen, folks. Once again, you can visit that website. It is at txcruise.org. Look it up. Play with it for a while. Get familiar with it. Do the comparisons, and maybe find the university or college that is best fit for you or your loved ones. We appreciate you both being with us.
Thank you, Chris.
Have a good day.
It started with one little pill.
Or not. And pull it up. And we'll get to where we can actually we'll get there.
Just while we're waiting, we've actually connected this data for some time, but a real issue is having a really good access point that is easy for people to get to and not too wonky. And we've had actually connected to the workforce data for a number of years and had it accessible in other forms. But this, working with the Workforce Commission, has allowed us to have a much more accessible site to virtually anyone who wants to get into it.
And let me ask this, just along those lines, David. I mean, That's a local news show.
That is a local.
What are we doing? I mean, and that went really well. Okay, I think people who watched that got real value out of it and learned something that they didn't know. Is there a plan for doing that in a broader scale, that we do more of that?
Actually, we have put out a press release. TWC also put out a press release where it is going to be part of the training for Advice Texas, as part of the counselor suite, that sort of thing. So we're trying to get that out through those kind of mechanisms.
The TEA has been involved in some of this as well.
TEA is aware of it, and we're trying to get them to get it into their training a little bit more.
That's kind of where high school seniors kind of turn into.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, we're trying. It has a lot of different options. You can look at by selecting a major. So if a student knows what or thinks they know what they want to major in, because obviously that changes on a regular basis. They have an occupation that they can select, or they can, if they know what institution they want to go to, they can select. And it provides the information a little bit differently for each of them. So if you look at a four-year institution, we'll just look at Angelo State. Do very well.
Actually doing it now, I mean, one interesting thing is that
Here,
if there's really a field you want to go into, you can look at this and take into account the cost. So if you really want to be an elementary school teacher, you may want to think, does it really pay to pay twice as much tuition at one school versus another, if you're convinced that's what you want to do, and you can actually get at your potential debt burden by virtue of that. There are a lot of things that one can take into account. There are some surprising differences in terms of starting salaries at different schools. I want to also point out, it's important for people to look at this, there's actually a notation in terms of what percentage of the students are we able to match, because some schools send more people out of state. And so, for example, the University of Texas doesn't have the same match as the University of Houston Victoria, because most of their students stay locally and certainly within the state. And so you can't get quite at that. And the commissioner mentioned PhDs. Well, many PhDs have to leave Texas to get their faculty jobs, so you can't quite get at all those. But there's no one that gets it more than we do, and it's far better than not having any data. But it really gives a chance to compare. So
yes, and this is for Angelo State. It provides their address. It provides the average tuition. It gives them some background information. You can look at the degrees, average earnings of degrees, and we go from the first year out all the way to the 10th year out. Because when you're looking at that percent, that loan amount, we provide the first year loan ratio, but some of these lines are steeper than the other, so that 10 years out. So then you can go down and let me see if I can. Oops. These are the average first year earnings for their total and statewide, so it compares them to some statewide numbers. All right, we'll just use arrows. Then if you want to, you can select on a degree. And I can read it.
That's
so.
finance.
Okay. Somebody with better eyes will tell you what it is. It gives a little bit of a description about what that degree program is. And then it talks about that sort of thing.
But this just seems to line up completely with what we were just talking about with Dr. Faulkner. I mean, this tool just lines up with the strategic plan and the four key components from that we need to make sure that this is all presented together and that the public really has an understanding of what we're doing. I mean, so much of what I think our opportunity is to really, how do we drive this message out there so the public are really aware of what these tools are so they make those informed decisions. It just lines up nicely. I just think it's a great opportunity to pull all of this together.
And we're going back and filling in years. So if you go out to 2012, for that same thing, you only have 1 year of wage data. So, as we go further out, we're updating it so that, you can look at, okay, here's what they did over time, and then in the later years, where are they starting? And can you expect to see that same sort of thing?
And that's
This a lot of way. It's an interactive almanac.
It's definitely an interactive almanac. And I will say that, and I'll give kudos to TWC. This was done through a joint, obviously, with using TWC data, but they also paid for it. We have the data on the students that because FERPA can't give them, they give us all their UIH record data. So we run it, but they paid for it through a Department of Labor grant. And so we're working with them very closely on a lot of this information.
We've had a very close data relationship with TWC for more than a decade, but that relationship has become much more intense given the recent efforts between the Commissioner and Commissioner Alcantar has really helped take those to an even higher level.
One thing you can see a little bit better here, because we do only have 1 year of data, so it's not quite as crammed together, is students can look at, like, what is their average SAT and how many of those completed at this college. And so it gives them kind of, if they want to look at students that have a similar background, how will they probably do, that sort of thing.
So this is specifically for finance and financial management services. So you could look at the same thing for
different
sociology or accounting or
great tool.
Any
electrical
of
engineering.
those. So it's we've gotten some really good feedback, and we're already kind of talking about Cruise 2.0, like what kind of information would be better and what's a better way of displaying it and that sort of thing. One thing that can be useful is that you'll notice that we have this output in Excel. So a student can actually download this, or a counselor can download that information and look at it more closely and manipulate it and put it out for different things for comparison purposes. So.
At some point, one thing, Susan, we might want to think about is one of the considerations we had for the level of debt for students is staff did some great calculations in terms of looking at that first year income and how long it would take them to pay off their debt, how long it would take them to save up adequate money for a down payment for a home. So that, that 60% was connected to some real life events and what would be a reasonable level given income levels. And so that might be something in the future that we might want to add away from them to get the more direct connection between the two.
And this, actually, if you go back and click on for the occupation, it actually will take you to a TWC website, which says, here's the occupation, here's the job market, here's the type of degree that you need or type of education that you need in order to do that type of work.
Could you show very quickly? It's a site you can get to
this is a
at
cruise.
TWC that's also relevant in terms of understanding what your costs will be. Are you able to get that quickly? It essentially will tell you, what kind of transportation
Maybe
do you
if
want
I can
when you
figure out where I'm
graduate?
at.
Are you going to live at home? Are you going to live in an apartment? What city are you going to live in? And it actually gives you an estimate of how much income you're going to need to graduate.
I think
Might help.
And it's something that, most 18-year-olds have no concept of, and frankly, many 5-year-olds don't.
Is this, I think, no,
check.
It's reality check.
reality check.
Sorry.
It's a TWC. Oh, nope, this is not the right reality check.
Well, we'll have to make sure that.
Careful.
Yeah, I think I'm about to get web sensed here.
What you click on.
Yeah.
Well, we'll make sure you have a link to that.
It is actually a very good site, and it's used by a lot of counselors already.
We probably need to
but
have a
this is-
smoother link from
Right.
directly
To
there
that.
because it's
to their site.
the
We'll
more
just
you
go ahead.
have easily accessible, the more likely people are. You shouldn't have to learn how to get to multiple sites.
Yeah, we'll put a link on there, but it's actually a very good site, and it talks about, do you want to live in an apartment? Do you want to live downtown? Do you want to live, kind of what type of lifestyle do you want? And of course, when they're in 8th grade, they want the Ferrari, and they want a 5,000 square foot house, and they want this and this and this, and it's like, okay, here's what you're going to need to do,
and this
I know,
is,
I know it woke my children up.
But part of what we're trying to do is to get parents and students thinking about careers earlier on. And Mr. Honda sent a link to a Wall Street Journal article where a much higher percent of students are selecting their majors as freshmen, even though they may change them, but they're really thinking a little further ahead than they used to. And so we need to help with that process.
Do we have any reports on how many hits we've had, and is there a trend? Are we seeing it grow?
I can get that for you. I'm not sure.
Well,
I don't know that.
Should monitor to see.
Oh, yes.
That what we're doing is working. If we're not getting it in front of our audience that we want it to, then you'll begin to see the hits just drop off. So
Right.
We also
So we
need to
can
monitor
make sure
the
we're
time,
watching that.
the time spent there too. Some of you get heavy hits, but little time spent. That's troublesome as well.
Yes, the amount of time. And I'm not sure whether this is part of our Google Analytics that we get, because it's not a core name board website. It's a different website, so I'm not sure they're running it on both of those at this point.
Okay.
So.
All right, moving on. Agenda item 5E is an update on closing the gaps. And Julie Eklund, Deputy Assistant Commissioner, Strategic Planning, will give a presentation and answer any questions. Hi, Julie.
Good morning.
Good morning.
This morning, I'm going to provide an update on the Closing the Gaps participation and success goals, with particular emphasis on the participation goal. As you may recall, we presented preliminary enrollments to you for fall 2014 last October. Well, now our fall enrollment data has been certified. Texas added about 12,500 additional students in fall 14. And as you can see, our trend is back on the upward side after a slight setback this year, and we are 5,000 students over our 585,000 target for 2014. We still need about 40,000 students to reach our 2015 Closing the Gaps goal for participation. We did receive some encouraging news this week. We looked at our preliminary flex enrollments, and those flex enrollments are for students who attend later in the fall, but we capture their enrollment in the spring. And those numbers look like they're going to be up some for last fall. So that will add a little bit to our total. So overall, as we near the end of the plan, you can see that we've made strong progress on a very ambitious goal, and we've had some really huge years in the last decade. For example, we added nearly 130,000 students from 2008 to 2009. So you can see those big jumps reflected in the data. It's slowed down a bit, but again, we're still on track, and we're almost there. As this slide shows, Hispanic participation has continued its upward trend. We added almost 15,000 additional Hispanic students in fall 2014. However, this news is a little less encouraging than what we saw for our overall participation. And in 2014, we were still almost 100,000 short of our 2014 target. But now what I'd like to do is share with you some slides that look at Closing the Gaps participation a little differently than what we've looked at in the past. And we're going to be looking at overall enrollment numbers rather than just the additional enrollments needed to reach our goal. What this slide shows is that we've had some white enrollment decreases in the last several years. But I'd also like to point how much the other category has grown, which is something we don't look at very often. This change in the other category is due in part to a change in how the Census Bureau began collecting race and ethnicity data in 10, and we adjusted the way we collect that data to align with the federal change. And you can see here that we had a 60,000 student jump from 2008 to 2010 in this other category. And I think it's important when we're looking especially at this data I'm showing here to understand that sometimes that other category clouds the overall picture. Students are now able to select several races if they would like to identify as being from several races, and that was not an opportunity that they had prior to 2010. So I think this reflects some of the changes we've seen there. And then moving on in the same theme of looking at overall enrollments in Texas higher education, you can see from this slide that we not only have we seen very large increases in the Hispanic, African American, and other categories since 2000. I think it's really important to look at the progress here and to look. I think this data reflects certainly improvements that we've seen at institutions in terms of their efforts to enroll more Hispanic and African American students. But these larger numbers also reflect the changing Texas population in 2014. Larger percentages of the African American and Hispanic population are participating, and those populations are a larger share of Texas's overall population than they were in 2000. And I think this slide really reflects that. Now I want to share a little bit about I want to share a little bit of gender-related data because I think this is an important area for us to look at. This slide shows our three largest groups and shows the percent of each population that is participating by gender, and that's the overall Texas population. And as you can see, for every group, males are at least 1 percentage point behind females. This is typically how we've looked at this type of data with closing the gaps, but I also wanted to show it to you in a similar way to what we were talking about with the overall population. But this breaks out the data for 2000 and 2014 by gender for African American, Hispanic, and white students. And as you can see here, you can see the progress in this slide is for both male and female students, especially for African American and Hispanic students. If you look at the red bars, that's the 2014 data. So for each group, the blue bar compared to the red bar, especially for African Americans and Hispanics, you can see a lot of increases in terms of enrollment. But where we see some concerns is where you look at the red bars for each group and look at the male versus the female in 2014. And what I thought was interesting to note in looking at this data is that we've actually gone slightly backward. We've decreased slightly in terms of the percent of males for each group that are enrolled out of the entire group. So for example, in 2000, 38% of the African American enrollments were male, and in 2014, 37%. So that's gone down 1%. And that's pretty much the patterns that we see for all groups. For white males, we were at 45%, now we're at 44%. Hispanics, we were at 43%, now we're at 42%. So we're seeing a slight decrease there. As you can see from this data, we had 90,000 more female Hispanic enrollments than we had male Hispanic enrollments. So we're still seeing some real differences there, and I think that's something we want to note. One other thing that I saw when I looked at this slide that I thought was interesting is that you'll see, if you look at the Hispanic female enrollments in 2014, they're quite a bit above, about 40,000 above the white male enrollments. And that made me think, well, what's going on in terms of the population? As I said before, our populations have changed. And what I discovered is that actually 21% of our 18 to 35-year-old Hispanic female, or I should say 21% of our 18 to 35-year-old population consists of Hispanic females, and 19% are white males. So actually the changes you see are somewhat reflected in the population, but not entirely.
Just add, before she goes on, that one thing we've discussed recently in staff meetings is when you look at targets by ethnicity, that we have to be aware of this difference in males and females. So if we hit a target or exceed it, for example, with African American women who was 9.3%, African American males were sort of above the 5.7% we had at the time, but you have to be cognizant of that, and how do we deal with it in the next plan? So if we don't want to achieve sort of an goal just because the women are carrying everything if the men are lagging so far behind, and we're trying to figure out the right mix between the goals to make that clear, because it is a continuing issue we have to address.
Well, I don't think it starts with college. I think it really is, if you look at your dropout rate in high school, you're losing more males in high school than you are females. So you end up with more female candidates for college when they're 18. But I don't know what TEA is looking at, but that's really where a lot of the safety net needs to start back in 8th, 9th grade.
You're exactly correct. And if you look at it, Julie doesn't have this today, but we have the 8th grade cohort looks at that very thing, and you can see the lag happening before, just as you've stated.
Yes. Okay, and I just have one slide today that looks at our success goal, because I thought you might be interested to see the new number for our fiscal year 2014 completions. Last year we were at 243,000 completions for bachelor's, associates, and certificates, and now we've jumped up about 8,000, over 8,000 more completions, so we're at 251,000 completions overall. So I think we can all be very proud of the progress that's been made in Texas on this goal. Yes.
Julie went by very quickly, but one reason some of these numbers are different is we have more data than we had at one time. So we have the for-profits, which comes in much later in the fall. Then we have the flex entry enrollments, which Julie mentioned. So we're trying to make sure that they're the most up-to-date numbers, and Julie and her staff are really staying on top of this to make sure. You'll notice that the success goal is higher than the last time you saw it.
Yes. Yes, and that's a wonderful lead-in, Dr. Gardner, because I just want to talk finally a little bit about the timeline for closing the gaps, because we do have data coming in at different points. You'll see actually a slight change on this from what you were given in your handout, because we will be presenting the 2015 progress report to you in June, but that report will include 2014 data. So I initially had written 2014 progress report, and I think that's it's important to note that it can get a little bit confusing, even for us, when we think about the years. You will be seeing the 2015 progress report, but it's not the final report, because it's all of the 2014 data that we just showed you that will be presented in June, and that will include, we hope, the certified flex that I mentioned. We've got some preliminary now. And then next fall and spring, we will be collecting the degree and certificate data from fiscal year 2015, and then collecting the fall 2015 enrollments. And then those final results will be presented to the board in the final progress report in the spring to summer of 2016, once our flex entry is certified and we have our most up-to-date career school data. So basically we have one more year ahead in terms of tracking our progress on closing the gaps. So you will see some updated data this summer, and also information on excellence and research, which we haven't talked about today. And then a year from today, we will close out our closing the gaps plan. So thank you.
Is there a plan on the releasing of that, next year, of releasing what the final results were, to really celebrate and to make known to the public the achievements and what we've done over the last 15 years?
Say the same thing I was. Okay, so we had discussions with external relations and others about using our governing board conference and our Star Awards to really emphasize this, and we were hoping to do it in December simply because of the data issue, because of conflicts with institutional meetings and various things we're looking at. We'll just ask you if the November date's okay. So I think we will still do that, but we will need to have a follow-up later in the year. But we were talking about bringing together some key members of Closing the Gaps, some key board members, some of the leadership at the time with today, to sort of celebrate the outgoing plan and the new plan at the same time. So, did you have anything to add? Okay.
David, I don't think any of us here today or anybody on the board was around in 2000. But these goals weren't the original goals in 2000. Is that correct?
That's correct.
And
increased
they were
them.
adjusted upwards significantly in most of these areas, if not all.
Especially participation and success. Those were
Okay.
but we had changes to the research goal as well to increase that.
So we've actually far exceeded what the original goals were.
Far exceeded, yes.
The original goal for participation was 500,000.
Okay.
So we're at 595,000, roughly 590.
And that's a good opportunity to say that we're hoping that the board will approach the new plan in the same way, and that we have regular reports, and if we're making progress faster than we thought, that or the population has changed in a significant way, that if we should make the goals more, raise them, that we ought to do that. It's all about getting better. And if we've achieved it all by 5 years afterwards, and we should increase them. We need to constantly improve.
Julie, thank you. Appreciate that. All right, agenda item 5F we did earlier, so it was taken out of order, which brings us to agenda item 5G is an update on the coordinating board's legislative priorities for the 84th Texas Legislature. John Wyatt, Director of External Relations, will provide an update, and I see Linda Battles is going to join him at the microphone. Lots going on, so look
Yes,
forward to
sir.
hearing.
So half of our team is down at the Capitol right now because we've got House Higher Education and Senate Higher Education going on. And in fact, that's why the commissioner's not here. So he was testifying on a bill. I'm going to give you an update on the board's legislative appropriations request as it stands now. And normally I would provide this report to the Agency Operations Committee, but I wanted to take this opportunity to give you a snapshot of what things look like right now. The House Appropriations Committee adopted the committee substitute for House Bill 1 on March 17th, and that bill became available online just yesterday afternoon. The Senate Finance Committee is in the process of doing what's called markup, where they get the work group recommendations and adopt those. So yesterday afternoon they did meet and they made some adoptions. So, but they're still working. And we're anticipating that they're going to adopt a committee substitute to Senate Bill 2 tomorrow afternoon. So today, what I'm going to try and do is provide you with an update on where our legislative exceptional items are in terms of both bills. You have a couple of handouts in front of you. The first is a PowerPoint presentation, which I'm going to be working off of. The second are two spreadsheets. One is for committee substitute for House Bill 1. This is a more complete overlook of what's in the bill at this point for our entire budget. And Senate Bill, committee substitute for Senate Bill 2 is a little more incomplete because they're still working and making decisions. But this is just really for your reference. And if you have any questions about these spreadsheets, let me know. But I'm going to be working off of the PowerPoint presentation. So for committee substitute for House Bill 1, you'll see here the overall funding for the coordinating board. For all funds, you'll see a $1.5 billion amount for all, it's the total of all the four methods of finance. So you see it broken down here by general revenue dedicated, federal funds, and other funds. That represents an increase of 2.4% over the 14-15 biennium. You'll see some reductions in the general revenue dedicated amount there, and that's primarily due to the reductions in the Beyond Time program, the tuition set-aside funding for that program. You'll recall that the introduced version of House Bill 1 reduced the funding levels in Beyond Time for both public and private institutions to cover renewal students only. So John's going to be talking a little bit more about that legislation to eliminate the program over time. You'll also see a reduction in other funds of 31.5%, and that is primarily due to a reduction in private gifts and donations from the Texas Guaranteed Student Loan Corporation. TG had contributed a significant amount of money for Texas grants that we don't anticipate getting in the future. This table provides a comparison of committee substitute for House Bill 1 and the Senate Finance Committee's markup decisions for committee substitute for Senate Bill 2. And this is the 4 major state financial aid programs. As a reminder, we requested a total of 24 exceptional items totaling approximately $300 million. And Texas grants and Texas Educational Opportunity grants were our number 1 and number 2 priorities, respectively, followed by the Texas College Work Study at number 10 and tuition equalization grants at number 15. You may recall from my presentation at the Agency Operations Committee meeting in January, when I provided an overview of House Bill 1, it included a $41 million increase in Texas grants. And the committee substitute reduced that amount to $37.7 million in order to provide a proportional increase to the Texas Educational Opportunity Grant Program. Representative Howard was very interested in ensuring that they were treated equally. She was the one that spearheaded the coordinating board's recommendation to separate Texas grants from TEOG. And you're familiar with some of the unintended consequences from that, and so she wanted to ensure that that was taken care of appropriately in the appropriations process. At the committee substitute for House Bill 1 for Texas grants funding level, we estimate that we'll be able to serve approximately 94% of all eligible students in the first year of the biennium in FY16. And that'll go down to 79% in FY17, and that is at an average award amount of $5,000. For the Texas Educational Opportunity Grant Program, for the House side, we're based on that level of increase of $41.1 million. We anticipate serving approximately 23% of the students, and then at the $27 million increase that the Senate has put in, we think we can serve approximately 18% of eligible students. You'll recall that our exceptional item was $37.3 million to serve approximately 22% of the students. Regarding the tuition equalization grants program, the House had originally appropriated the reduced amount of $12.2 million from the Be On Time program for the private institutions to go towards Texas grants, but the committee ultimately adopted that money for TEG. So that will go back to the private institutions. They felt that, if we're going to be taking away money from the private institutions in one program, we should replenish it in the other program. The Senate appropriated about $5.2 million more for TEG. For Texas College Work Study, the House didn't have any increases for work study, but did adopt our exceptional item into Article 11. As you're familiar with Article 11, it's known as the wish list. But it could come up in conference committee if the members choose to do that. So it's still not quite dead yet. So, and the good news is the Senate work group adopted an increase of $2.5 million for a total of $21.3 million for the next biennium. Yes.
Before we go on, it's a significant. Do we have any idea on the Texas grants? We've got an increase of 37.7 in the House bill and 83.4 in the Senate bill. Do you have any idea where that disparity in numbers came from?
Well, I can tell you that when we sat in on the first meeting of the Senate Finance Committee Article 3 work group, Senator Seliger and Senator West wanted to move the full $137.9 million request for Texas grants. And we're grateful for that. On the House side, I think they just had a certain amount of dollars that they were working with, and they were just trying to accomplish as much as they could with the amount of dollars that they were given. We're very pleased, obviously, with the $83.4 million. If we can serve almost 100% of all eligible students at a $5,000 award amount. I think that is a huge, huge victory for students in the program. So we're hopeful
the
that
next
they'll stick
strategic
with that.
plan, too.
Yes, sir. Okay. So on this slide, you see Advise Texas, one of our high priorities. In the House, we didn't get any funding for this. You'll recall this was funded through federal College Access Challenge Grant, which is no longer available. And they did adopt a rider in Article 11. On the Senate side, they adopted $4 million, and the other half is in Article 11. So this is good news. On the Texas Research Incentive Program, the House approved. You may recall that the introduced version of House Bill 1 included $177 million for the program. That was achieved by consolidating two research programs, the Texas Competitive Knowledge Fund and the Research Development Fund. I think there was significant concern expressed by the institutions about this approach, and so the new increase in the House side is $70.6 million, but there's also an additional $67.5 million in Article 9, which is contingent on legislation that would abolish the Emerging Technology Fund. So right now in the House, we have a total of $106.2 million, and that will cover most of the backlog in the matching dollars, except for $8.6 million. On the Senate side, the Senate Bill 2 had been introduced at a decrease of $8.9 million. And the Senate work group did not adopt our exceptional item request of $14.2 million. But I think it's probably going to fare pretty well in conference, so we'll see how that goes. The Graduate Medical Expansion Program programs in our budget in the House side was increased by $14.4 million, and I have to say there's a correction on my slide, and I apologize. I put this slide together last night. But there's a $4 million adopted in Article 11. That should be $12.5 million that was adopted in Article 11. So, correct, 12.5. The House Bill 1, the introduced version, increased it by $14.4 million, and that's where they're at. On the Senate side, you may recall that Senate Bill 2, as introduced, had included $60 million for GME. What they've done at this point is pended all GME funding so that they can kind of work out. They said that there's so many different pots of money for graduate medical education that they wanted to take a look at that and get a better control of it. And also they're looking at changes through Senator Nelson's bill, Senate Bill 18. And so they're trying to coordinate what's in the appropriations with what's in Senate Bill 18. So that's to be determined, but I think GME is going to fare well this session. The Joint Admissions Medical Program, we had a $2 million exceptional item request in the House that went into Article 11. In the Senate, they adopted a $2 million increase. You'll recall, and this was Senator West's high priority program. And we had an exceptional item request for expanding the regional pathways projects. We received that in the House version. It was not adopted by the Senate work group. The doctoral incentive loan repayment program, the Senate work group adopted the $700,000 request. The House put it in Article 11. And then a new program, well, it's not a new program. The Educational Aid Exemption Program was actually created in 1997, has been unfunded since 2011. And this is to encourage educational aides to become certified teachers. and it's a tuition exemption program. We had administered that program up until 2011 when it got zero funded. The House transferred some funding from TEA's budget, $1.5 million, to our budget for this purpose.
Linda, so if they're in the House budget but they're not in the Senate, is that still handled in conference? Do they work it out at that point?
Yes.
Okay.
So any differences between the two bills then become a conference committee item for discussion and consideration. You'll recall that we highly prioritized our IT exceptional items simply because we've not had a capital budget for 4 years, and our needs are growing, and we simply need additional funding to help with our IT infrastructure replacements, our IT security upgrades as a result of the statewide Gartner assessment, and then the centralized accounting, payroll, personnel system implementation, which the Comptroller's Office is leading for all state agencies. So the good news is, with the help of Chairman Hahn on the House side, Representative Marquez was able to secure funding for our number one IT exceptional item, which was the equipment replacements of $490,000. On the Senate side, and I want to thank Ms. Janelle Shepard for helping us there as well. The IT work group, the Senate Finance Committee actually had a specific IT work group that looked at and evaluated all of the IT exceptional item requests from the states, from all the state agencies. And so we were able to, they did adopt $327,000 for our IT upgrades. This is a third less than what we originally requested. In terms of the security upgrades in the House, again, Representative Marquez was able to get our request of $390,000 for security upgrades here at the coordinating board. We had another request for upgrades at the data consolidation services, and the Senate work group did give us that full funding for those two requests. The CAPS implementation on the House side, we did not get any funding. It is in Article 11. On the Senate side, the IT work group adopted $1.4 million, and this is 50% of our original request, and essentially all state agencies' requests for CAPS implementation was also cut 50%. So it was an across-the-board decision. These are all preliminary on the Senate side because the IT work group will be presenting its recommendations to the Senate Finance Committee tomorrow. So obviously these could change. So we'll be listening tomorrow, see what happens. These are the rest of our exceptional items. I'm not going to go through all of them, but you can see the status. On the three IT-related ones, again, we're not sure whether they're just not going to be adopted or they're going to be adopted into Article 11. I don't think that there's any hope in getting any funding into Article 3 for those three, website redesign, accessibility, compliance, and video conferencing. Also, just want to mention on the Teach for Texas loan repayment program, you'll see on the Senate side there's a reallocation of $2.6 million from the Teach for Texas loan repayment program to a math and science loan repayment program, which is Senate Bill 686, which is one of the Lieutenant Governor's pieces of legislation. And because the Senate Bill 2, the introduced version, had increased Teach for Texas by that amount, it won't negatively impact the current funding levels that we have for that program. And that concludes my presentation.
Linda, so the family practice residency on the Senate side, Senate Bill 18 is the GME bill that you were talking about.
That's correct.
Could you just explain to me? I'm not familiar with Article 11. Like, how does like that different? What's different from that from the regular budget, and how does that work?
Yeah, well, it's not part of the appropriations bill per se. It's sort of what's called a wish list, and it's sort of a placeholder for the legislature to say, you know, this is important, but let's put it over here so that we can fund all of our really important things. And if we have any money that we can play around with by conference committee, then we can pluck some of those into the bill. So that's why it's a wish list. We're
so like
all
when,
wishing it goes into the Article 3.
When the House and Senate come together to hash out the differences here, that some of those things from Article 11 might get funded, some of them may not.
Correct.
I was going to say, historically, what happens to wish list items?
Yeah.
It's going to next time's wish list.
Yes.
Good morning. You should have in your materials a document that looks like this. It's a spreadsheet of the recommendations that you've adopted for the 84th Texas Legislature. And I'm going to be working off that document, giving you an update on where your recommendations stand, as well as highlights of a couple of additional bills that you should be aware of. The top three recommendations, your Tier 1 recommendations, are under the green row. The first recommendation was to adopt a system of outcomes-based formula funding for universities. The current status is that legislation has been introduced in the Senate, that's SB 22 by Senator Zaffirini, which would codify in statute an outcomes-based funding model that is very similar to what the Formula Advisory Committee recommended and you adopted. There has also been a budget rider in HB 1, the House Appropriations Bill, that would adopt outcomes-based formula funding, the model that you recommended, but that has been placed in Article 11. As you know, that's the wish list, so the odds of that happening are not terrific. The input that we've gotten from legislators has been that the momentum on kind of performance funding has gone in another direction. And Senator Seliger introduced a bill, SB 778, that he has termed performance-based tuition. Chairman Zerwas on the House side has introduced identical legislation, that's HB 3293. And what both these bills do is they look at the current LBB performance measures for universities, the 9 that are common to all universities. And what the legislation says is that if an institution meets targets set by the LBB on a majority of those measures, so it would be 5 of those 9 measures, then they are permitted to increase their tuition as they see fit. If they do not meet 5 of 9 measures, they are restricted to increasing their tuition to the rate of inflation. And our understanding from Senator Seliger is he sees this as, in some ways, as killing 2 birds with 1 stone in terms of having consequences for whether institutions actually perform on their performance measures, and potentially reining in the rate of increase of tuition and fees. That's the genesis of his legislation. This is actually being heard in Senate Higher Education right now, and Commissioner Paredes testified earlier regarding this legislation, and his input that he shared with both chairmen and other parties has been, if you're going to go down this route, we have recommendations for metrics that are important to include in this legislation. He's recommended that those metrics that were adopted by the Formula Advisory Committee, which represent the consensus of universities and the board, should be included in this measure. Those metrics are total undergraduate degrees adjusted by the institution's 6-year graduation rate, undergraduate degrees per 100 full-time student equivalents, undergraduate degrees to at-risk students, and retention to 30, 60, and 90 semester credit hours. So because we went through a whole process during the interim to evaluate those metrics, and everyone agrees that those are important student success metrics, our recommendation is that they be included in any legislation.
John,
sorry, sir. Yeah.
Are any of those included in the existing 9 in Senator Seliger's bill?
There's a couple that are similar. There is a measure for it's first-generation students that is somewhat similar to the at-risk, but our recommendation is to adopt our definition of at-risk, which includes Pell Grant recipients, part-time students, older students entering higher education, students who have lower than average SAT, ACT scores. And then there is a measure that's somewhat similar in that they measure 4- and 6-year graduation rates in the bill. The issue we've raised regarding that is that the LBB measure of graduation rates does not include transfer students. It's only students who begin at and graduate from that same institution. We've recommended that they use the coordinating board's graduation rates, which recognize students who transfer from one Texas institution to another in that institution's graduation rate.
Okay.
Some of the additional metrics that we've recommended include increasing efficiency, specifically the efficiency with which students earn their degrees. So we've recommended including reducing a student's time to degree, reducing a student's attempted semester credit hours in earning a degree, increasing the number of courses that a student takes in a year to 30 semester credit hours. As I mentioned, we're recommending the at-risk metric. And then also, we've recommended that currently the bill allows the institutions to recommend what benchmarks they would have to meet on the metrics. And then the LBB would evaluate that, and they would make the determination as to, do we go with the institution's benchmarks? Do we change them? Our concern is that that's not necessarily something that the LBB has a tremendous amount of expertise in. They do evaluate the current performance measures, so they do have some experience. But what we need is for those benchmarks to align with the strategic plan. So if we're going to meet our goals and targets for the next strategic plan, then we need institutions to deliver specific outcomes on these metrics. So the recommendation that we've carried to Senator Seliger and Chairman Zerwas is that the coordinating board be involved in helping to set those benchmarks on the metrics. As I said, it's currently being heard in Senate Higher Education. We do understand that a committee substitute will come out on this, and the indications we've had is that they are very receptive to changing the metrics and to including additional metrics in this. So I'd imagine that the bill that we actually see come out of committee is going to be pretty substantially different from what we see right now.
So to that point, so if they do adopt those metrics, then we're essentially still get to the same end line.
We would, if they adopted the metrics, we would still be measuring them on the basis of those metrics that we agreed were important. The issue of doing it based on tuition versus formula funding, I think the concern would be, is that as effective an incentive to do it through tuition as opposed to formula funding? I think the concern is that because the straitjacket, if you will, on them is if you don't meet these, you can still increase your tuition just at the rate of inflation. There's a question of is this as impactful? We've looked at, has this been done elsewhere? And there was a somewhat similar example in Louisiana, but not a lot of indication that it was particularly successful.
Whereas we have data that says going the other way is successful.
And has been adopted. The performance funding model based on formula funding has been adopted in many more states.
Right.
So there's no more questions on that. I'll move on to the next item. Number 2, regarding your recommendation to allow community colleges to offer baccalaureate degrees under certain circumstances. The board's recommendation has been introduced in both chambers. It's SB 271 by Senator Ellis in the Senate and HB 1384 by Representative Sarah Davis in the House. There have also been several bills introduced that would take a more piecemeal approach to this. Legislation has been introduced to allow certain community colleges to offer baccalaureates in dental hygiene. Bills have been introduced to allow community colleges to authorize baccalaureates in early childhood education. So really, I think legislators who have particular interest in maybe their local community college being able to offer a specific program. There's also been legislation introduced, HB 1574, which would allow the coordinating board to authorize those community colleges that already offer baccalaureate programs, so South Texas College, Brazosport, and Midland, to exceed the current cap of no more than 5 programs. And the commissioner's position on all of these has been, rather than adopt this piecemeal approach, it would make much more sense from a statewide perspective to adopt our recommendation, which would have a coherent, defined process by which all community colleges would be fairly considered for their proposals for a baccalaureate program. On number 3, tuition revenue bonds. Actually, just this morning, HB 100 was voted out of the House Higher Education Committee. That is Chairman Zerwas's legislation to authorize TRBs. I believe that bill has an estimated debt service in the coming biennium of about $250 million. And I believe it would also authorize approximately $3 billion in TRBs. That legislation, again, it was voted out of committee, so we don't know when exactly it will be up on the floor. On the Senate side, there have been multiple bills introduced to authorize TRBs. It's very likely that SB 150 by Senator Seliger will be the vehicle they'll use on the Senate side. He's the chairman, so that's his right. And the feedback we've gotten from members has been that they're very hopeful that they can reach an agreement between the two houses on what exactly is going to be included in a TRB bill so that they can get it done this session.
Does he have funding amounts in his bill?
With Senator Seliger?
SB 150?
I believe they're similar to Chairman Zerwas's bill. I'd have to go back and look.
I can just add, on the House side, there's $250 million for debt service for TRBs, and on the Senate side, there's $240 million.
And I know we're running a little low on time, so I'll just hit some highlights maybe in the remaining items here. Number 4, regarding authorizing the coordinating board to develop programs of study and expanding our fields of study. That legislation has been introduced in both chambers. There is a subcommittee of the House Higher Education Committee. It's the subcommittee on post-secondary and workforce readiness that is being chaired by Representative Clardy that is actually scheduled to hear this bill on April 2nd. So given that he is the chairman and it's his bill, we anticipate a positive reception in the subcommittee. Number 6, regarding the inclusion of base academic skills in the Texas Success Initiative. These are those students who have tested on the TSI such that they're not quite to our standards for developmental education, but with intensive remediation, they can get there. Legislation is actually being heard in House Higher Education today regarding this bill. Our expectation is that that will be pended. If you go to the next page. Recommendation number 9, which is to give the coordinating board the authority to block license renewals for certain professional licenses if those individuals are in default of our loans. That legislation has been introduced, was actually heard in House Higher Education this morning. Again, they're pending all legislation at this point, but there were no objections raised in committee. On number 10, regarding surety bonds for career colleges, that item, we received some feedback from the career colleges concerned that this is a provision they're already subject to through the Department of Education in the requirement to post surety bonds if they don't meet certain financial health markers, and that it would put them in a very bad situation to be required to have a state requirement to post a surety bond as well. And there was very little appetite in the legislature for introducing this legislation. So this was a conversation we had with the board chair and vice chairman. The decision was made not to pursue this. Rex Peebles does have an agenda item in the cause committee in which he's going to go over our current authorities in regard to career colleges and what we're able to do within our existing authorities. And then finally, I'll just note that number 11 regarding the higher education fund, bills are being heard today in both the Senate and the House. This is the higher education fund is for those institutions that don't participate in the PUF. And every 10 years, we're required to change how we allocate that funding among the eligible institutions. So we've provided the information. There was a work group during the interim that developed the new allocation methodology, and that has been introduced by Senator Seliger and Representative Crownover. And I'll also mention a couple of other bills that are not your recommendations but have impacts for the coordinating board. HB 3569 was introduced by Chairman Zerwas right at the filing deadline. The caption is relating to the Texas Higher Education Coordinating Board, which is in some ways a scary caption because it's very, very broad. Yes, ma'am. The bill as it exists right now does several things. It requires that the membership of the board include a representative from the business and industry community, as well as representatives from the three sectors of higher education. It charges the agency with coordinating the pathway of students through the higher education system of this state. It adds impacts to the state economy and workforce to our program review criteria. And it allows the board to adjust financial aid allocation methodologies to ensure the efficient use of funds in serving the higher education needs of students. The important thing to understand about this bill is it is a shell bill. It is something that Chairman Zerwas introduced so that he would have options in terms of if he wanted to make changes to our statute. We've spoken to his staff about the motivation behind this bill. They've explained to us that the chairman wanted to have a vehicle should he want to make any changes that were recommended by the Strategic Fiscal Review. They have not specified any more as to what those changes may be, but it's in terms of these provisions that are in the bill currently, take them with a grain of salt, because the idea here is to have something that in a committee substitute or through the amendment process, they can make what they feel they need. And then the other bill I'll mention is HB 700 regarding the Beyond Time program. And this bill, again, is being heard as we speak in House Higher Education. This legislation was introduced by Representative Giddings. It would remove the Beyond Time program from statute. The requirement currently is that for the 15-16 academic year, Beyond Time would be initial and renewal students, but any year thereafter would be renewal. We actually had a meeting with Representative Giddings yesterday in which she clarified that her intent was that it would immediately be renewal students only. So the 15-16, the upcoming academic year, only renewal students would be eligible to participate in Beyond Time. The legislation states that beginning as of the fall 2020 semester, all students will have cycled out of Beyond Time and no awards will be made through the program. After September 1, 2020, any funding that's left in that GRD account, that Beyond Time account that's been accumulating funds, would be appropriated back to the institutions. We would be required to adopt a rule through negotiated rulemaking that would develop the methodology for allocating that funding back to the institutions. It should be based on, according to this legislation, fairly allocated to those eligible institutions at which the Texas Beyond Time student loan program was underutilized. So that, again, that would be subject to a rulemaking should the bill be adopted. It is being heard in House Higher Education right now. And those are the highlights that I have.
Thank you, John. Any questions? I know it's busy, and you guys are down there a lot.
Yes, sir, especially the Commissioner.
Has just arrived from there, so welcome back. Any other questions? Okay, thank you. Thank you. Agenda item 5H, number 1, was on the consent agenda. So agenda item 5I is consideration of adopting the staff recommendation to the committee relating to the issuance of a request for proposals for the redesign of the higher education accountability system. There's supplemental information on the gold paper at your place that explains the two different options, and Susan Brown, Assistant Commissioner, Strategic Planning and Funding, will cover the material in the supplemental material and will be available for questions. Susan?
Yes, thank you very much. As you know, we're going to be bringing to you a new strategic plan in July for adoption. We have the current accountability system is based around closing the gaps. We expect that there would need to be changes if we continue to have the accountability system based on the strategic plan. So we will need to implement changes. The current accountability system was put together back in 2004 in a very quick time frame. We had about 4 months to put it together. So it is in a language. It's in Cold Fusion, which is very hard to update. Even just adding a new year, you have to go through multiple steps. We feel that it would be helpful, beneficial to do some review and some design up front to incorporate the types of functionality and flexibility that we think is going to be needed in this new plan into that process of doing that. The current staff with the Helms conversion and that sort of thing, and that's why Sid is up here, is really swamped with all of the things, and so we're hoping to use unfunded salary dollars, unexpended salary dollars from open positions to do this RFP. There's two different ways of doing it. We have just a regular RFP, which is you go out. Because it is a service contract, it has to go through the Comptroller's Office, the LBB, the Governor's Office, and DIR before we could actually issue that RFP. The time frame, we think we could maybe get a vendor selected by mid-June. Because we're using unexpended salary dollars, all of the work has to be completed by the end of August. So we are not sure about the time frame on that. The other option is to use what is called a DBITS through DIR, which is the deliverables-based information technology services type contract. It would still go out for bid, but they already have contracts negotiated with multiple vendors. So we would select vendors that are on their contract, under contract with DIR. We would send it out to a minimum of 6 different vendors. And so we would be looking at that. Then it would come back. Because the contracts have already been established through the DIR process, that would shorten all of that time frame. And so we wouldn't have to go through the Comptroller's Office, the LBB, and the Governor's Office to get approval before issuing that. And so that's what we're talking about. We do know that there's been some issues and concerns. That's why we wanted to bring it to the committee. Health and Human Services, you may have heard, have had some contracting issues going through DIR, where they used a different process. They used a contracting process where they selected an individual contractor. They didn't actually open it up for bid from multiple contractors. So we wanted to make that clear in a public meeting that we would be still going out for bids before we came forward.
What would be the time frame for the second option?
The second option, we feel like we would be able to get something in place by May 1st.
Susan, if I'm understanding, the 6 vendors, we're going out for a minimum of 6 vendors.
A minimum of
more.
6. They have a list of contractors, so we would send it out to all the contractors that are on the list that fit this type of service. So we could send it out to those.
And if I'm understanding what you're saying, by doing it in this manner, we would not only in spirit, but as far as the directives, we would be meeting the governor's executive directive.
Yes,
and Senate Bill 20 that's in process now, we would meet all of the requirements.
We would meet all of the requirements of both of those. In the governor's office, the governor's executive director, and Senate Bill 20, which is kind of the statutory fix that is moving forward at this point. We would meet all of those as they're currently laid out in Senate Bill 20.
Bill, do you have any reason to suspect that this would not be in compliance?
No, sir, Mr. Chairman. As Susan has indicated, DIR, the Department of Information Resources, maintains a list of vendors who presumably have expertise in providing the services that Susan's area would be seeking. And historically, in order to obtain the services of one of those vendors, my understanding, and I'm certainly no expert in this, but my understanding is an agency could select just one vendor to deal with without issuing a statement of work to a number of vendors to see if another vendor might be able to do the same work for less, perhaps faster, etc. And in this instance, as Susan just indicated, the intent of staff would be to solicit all of the vendors on the list that perform these types of services with an eye toward capturing best value for the agency. So I do believe it complies with the governor's executive director of January 28th, and I believe it also will comply with Senate Bill 20. I have done some looking at Senate Bill 20, obviously, and there is going to be a committee substitute for that bill. But I checked as recently as 10 a.m., and that substitute was not yet available. But I believe that this will comply with Senate Bill 20. It certainly more than complies with the current state of the law.
How much is this?
We're capping it at 200,000.
Okay.
A question. Mm-hmm. So you're asking for approval of method 1 or method 2?
Method 2, going through the DIR too.
Okay.
So that it gives the vendor more time to actually get the work done.
You want to get this in fiscal year
15. The current fiscal year.
Right.
Otherwise, the money goes away.
I understand. I make a motion for method 2 and
Motion and a second. Any additional discussion? All in favor say aye. Aye. Opposed? Motion passes.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, Susan. And I believe that brings us to agenda item 5J, which is adjournment. Any other discussion? Second? Second. All in favor say aye. We are adjourned. Thank you very much.